Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. Thank you for your service. Veterans are the topic for tonight, and we're proud to have a friend and also a veteran, Lieutenant Colonel retired Fred Shaw. He is from Stewart County, is a former Green Beret, and he is the founder of the Museum of Military Culture. And today he will be sharing some of the things that he's found or had donated, and more importantly, stories from veterans that you will definitely want to hear. Fred, thanks for your service and thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
We got a few things here on the table. What would you like to start with?
Well, I guess I want to start with Veterans Day. Yesterday we pinned 5 Vietnam veterans at the church. That was through the American Legion. And it's something that we've been trying to do for the last couple of years, is to recognize those Vietnam veterans and actually welcome them home, because they did not get the same reception as we did in the past. And it's kind of funny. My father-in-law spent 3 tours in Vietnam, and when we came back from Desert Storm, he wouldn't talk to me for about 2 or 3 weeks. And finally I said, what's going on? Well, why are you not talking to me? And he goes, it's you guys. I'm like, us guys? What do you mean us guys? He said, you guys come back from Desert Storm and you have parades and all this stuff. He said, we came back from Vietnam. We didn't eat anything except spit on and, called baby killers. So we've tried to pin as many Vietnam veterans as we can just to say welcome home. The other thing we did today was we went down to one of the nursing homes and we pinned 6 veterans, and 5 of them actually being in the nursing home, 1 working there. And surprisingly enough, one of the guys was a World War II veteran that I did not know was still in Stewart County. So that was a plus for today. Right. So the last couple of days have been, exciting as far as veterans and their service. So I think it's been a great couple of days.
Sounds like it. Now, how long have you been doing this? When did you start the
museum? I started the museum back in 2015. I decided I had to grow up and do something. So I thought, well, let me do something I enjoy. So I started the Military Museum of Military Culture, so that I could kind of, do what I like and then start trying to capture veteran stories. So I started recording them probably about 2016. And I wish I had actually done it earlier, because there was only 4 World War II veterans still alive, except for the one that I found today in Stewart County. So I was actually able to record and sit down and talk to those guys before they passed, which it's very interesting to see how they came about. 2 of them actually were in the cavalry, horse cavalry, when they first went in. Oh, wow. And then transitioned to helicopters after that. One of the stories, which I think is interesting, is Mr. Dave. Dave was in the Army Air Corps and was trained as a B-29 ball gunner. Wow. So they sent him to the Pacific, and he got into the Pacific, and they said, we don't really need you anymore, because by that time, the war is scaling back. They're fixing to look at Japan as far as invasion, but they didn't need him. So he said, okay, so what am I going to do? So the sergeant looked at him, waved his magic finger and said, you're an MP. And he said, an MP? He said, yep, you're an MP. Go get on that plane and you're going to Guam. So he got on the plane and he got to Guam, and another MP met him there and says, okay, you're an MP. Here's your Japanese interpreter. Now go out in the woods and try to get the Japanese to surrender. And he's like, I trained as a B-29 gunner, and now I'm trying to get the Japanese to surrender out of the jungle. He says, what else could you ask for? So I thought that was an interesting story from Dave. And there's stories like that all the time. And we've really missed out on those through the years, because 2 generations and everything is forgotten.
Yep.
So if we don't capture it now, then those stories of those guys are lost. Now, a lot of those guys don't want to talk about it, and that's okay. That's understandable. But if the guys want to talk about it, I think we need to record it or videotape it for future generations, because somebody somewhere is going to be interested down the road. And if we don't, then it'll be like me. Well, there's things I wish I'd asked my dad. There's things I wished I'd asked my grandfather that I can't now, because when I was young, I didn't think about that. So I think those things are important. And the stories that you find are just amazing. For example, so there's a guy in the county named Ron, and Ron was a staff officer on the brigade staff. And they were trying to replace the battalion commander that was in the field. And Ron recommended this guy to take over as the battalion commander. And the brigade commander and the division commander said, okay, that's probably a good choice. So that's who we're going to pick. So the new battalion commander is sitting to Ron's left. The brigade commander is sitting to his right. And they're on a Huey. And they're flying out to the command post for the battalion to bring him in. And as they're coming in, they get shot down. So the helicopter crashes, the pilot's killed, the co-pilot's wounded, the battalion commander that is on the left and the brigade commander get out, grab the co-pilot, and they exit the airplane because they think that it's going to blow up. Ron's thrown forward. So a few minutes later, the battalion commander comes back over to the helicopter because he's going to grab the radios out of the helicopter. So he hears Ron moaning in the floor, so he grabs the radios and he grabs Ron and he pulls Ron out. The battalion commander that saved Ron was Colin Powell.
Wow.
So Colin Powell was the battalion commander that saved him. And many years later, Colin Powell came to Fort Campbell. And he had written a book, and Ron was actually in the book. So Ron's in line to have Colin Powell sign it. And he got to the table, and Colin Powell says, well, who do I make it out to? And he said, Ron. Looked up, and there stands Ron. And so him and Colin Powell had a pretty good moment there. Yeah. I think that's just amazing. I mean, those are the kind of things that just kind of give you goosebumps, especially with Colin Powell. Yeah. And if you ever haven't met Colin Powell, he was a character, especially when he would get off with other general officers. That was pretty cool. I got to witness that once when I was in Bosnia, so that's pretty cool. So those stories are out there, and if you don't ask, then you don't find out. So then you start relating items to stories. So you have an item that by itself is insignificant. For example, let's take this Doughboy helmet here. So if you look at it, you'll see that it's a normal 1917 Doughboy helmet, and on the front it has an oval with an H and 3 X's on it. So that's actually Old Hickory Division, which is the 30th Infantry Division, which my great-grandfather was a part of. So they had 2 brothers. So him and his 2 brothers joined the military in 1917. They went over to South Carolina to start training, and the youngest, Willie, died of the flu in 1917 because the flu was rampant through the United States. So they brought him back. They buried him. He's buried actually in, I think, Henry County. And then both of them went back to South Carolina and went to France all the way through to Germany, and both survived. Jesse Boyd was my great-grandfather, and he actually got a Purple Heart from World War I. And what's really interesting in it, if you can see the front of the helmet, you see that it's horizontal. Well, the units deployed over into Europe, and the emblems came afterwards. So when the 30th got their shoulder patches, they put it horizontal because they thought that's the way it went. And they painted it, as on the front of that helmet there, the patch horizontal. It's actually supposed to be vertical because that way you can get the O for Old Hickory and the H. So I'm in Kosovo, and there's this E6, and he walks by the door, and he's got a 30th entry patch on, which is horizontal. So I called him back and said, Sarge, come here. And he's like, what's up? I said, you got that patch on wrong. He goes, no, sir, it's right. I said, no, it's wrong. I said, because my grandfather wore it in World War I, and he had it horizontal, not vertical. And he started laughing. He goes, I didn't know that. I said, that's exactly why they're painted horizontal on the helmets, because they didn't know. They just got them, and whatever they thought was right was what they did. So I think that's part of the story that goes along with it. And I actually have the World War I picture of all three brothers. I have his discharge. I have some stuff he brought back, like silk handkerchief from 1917, his glasses, several other items that he carried when he was in France. So collectively, they're probably nothing, but once you add the story to it is when things actually start meaning. Because you could take a Doughboy helmet, for example, that one, and yep, okay, it's 30th Division, but who did it belong to?
Right.
Who wore it? Well, I think that's one of the most important things that we can capture, is not only capture the story, but capture the story that goes along with the item. And to me, that just makes it so much better, because it's not just a helmet sitting there, it's some helmet that somebody wore, and it has a story with it. So each one of these items have a story to it. So let's take the helmet over here on the left. So if you looked at that, you would say, okay, it's just a helmet. Well, most people would look at that and say, well, that's just the air assault on the front of it. That's actually not, because when they first went into Vietnam, it was called Air Mobile. So when they put it on the helmet, it was Air Mobile. So that belonged to a gentleman named Art. Now, here's the story behind that. We've all seen the movie Band of Brothers.
Right.
Okay? We've also seen the one where in Vietnam, they go into the hot LZ with Colonel Moore.
Right.
All right?
We were soldiers once.
We were soldiers once, correct. So Hal Moore is on the first helicopter. Art is on the third helicopter when they come into the LZ. So Art gets out with his platoon and goes to the outer perimeter. If you remember, there was a platoon that got separated from the battalion because they saw an NBA soldier. Art was in that platoon.
Oh, wow.
Art was pinned down for almost 3 days in that firefight with the NBA next to a deceased and a wounded U.S. service member through those nights until they were actually rescued.
And he lives around here, Art?
And he lives in Stewart County.
Wow.
And he recovered from his wounds there and went back and was actually wounded again in a rice paddy back in Vietnam. So once again, the story that goes along with the item is just amazing. And I just happened to meet Art. We have a farmer's market down in Dover. Mm-hmm. And I had set up with the Jeep, the 151, and Art came over and talked to me. And he said, you know, have you ever seen that We Were Soldiers? And I said, yeah, I've seen it. He goes, I'll never watch it. All right, Mr. Art, why not? He goes, because I lived it. And so that's where it came, and I got to sit down with him and talk to him. And like I said, then he gave me the helmet, which I'm very pleased to have. But it relates to a story that relates to a person. And I think that's what we're losing all the time, because many of these items, they're either thrown away, they're sold, go to flea markets, yard sale, and they're lost forever. So that's why I strive to get the stories that go along with it. For example, at the local pawn shop, I was called up, and they had a Purple Heart there that a couple was trying to pawn because they thought it was gold. So the girls held it for me, and I came down there, and there was a name on the back of it and a serial number. And we found the name of the guy, and he was part of the Army Air Corps flying a Mustang in the Philippines and was lost and never found. So his family posthumously was given the Air Medal and the Purple Heart. And because they were posthumously, they had the names engraved on the back. So how this ended up in Stewart County, I have no earthly idea. But what I did with that Purple Heart is there's an organization called Purple Heart Reunited. So I send it to them, and they will put the ribbon back on it, put it back in a case, and attempt to find the family. So I'm hoping they do. I haven't talked to them in the last month or two, so I'm hoping that they're able to find that and get that back to,
Right.
the family. Because so many things are lost like that way. And it wasn't 2 weeks later, another friend of mine calls up and he goes, I just dug a Purple Heart out of the dumpster. And it has a silver cluster and 3 bronze.
Wow.
Which is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 wounds to the Purple Heart. Now, it was a replacement Purple Heart, so there was no name or serial number, so we'll never know who that belonged to. But once again, it's people don't know what to do with stuff, and like I said, they just threw it away, threw a Purple Heart away. And I find that sad that, once again, that's lost. It's lost to history on who that was. And that person fought for his country, and now we don't know. We just can't tell who it is. So once again, it's another lost piece of our history that I just think is a crying shame that we don't, capture it.
Well, there's not that many with 9 wounds out there, though. I would think that'd be a fairly small number of people.
Probably is, but it's not listed that way. It's listed by names.
Right.
So if you find the name, then you can find the number of Purple Hearts, but you can't find the number of Purple Hearts and relate it back to a name.
Right.
And like I said, I don't know where it came from. So there's no telling who it might have been. But once again, if you don't catch the story with the piece, then then it's lost. So I got another one here. So this is a bayonet off of a French rifle from Vietnam. So it's actually a bamboo sheath that the guy carried around and held it in his waistband. So that actually was given to me by my father-in-law, Lowell Kennard, who did 3 tours in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And he said he got it off of an NVA guy that didn't need it anymore, so he thought he would take it back, and he did. I actually have his flight suit, I got his flight helmet, and his boots that he had in Vietnam. And there's actually a picture of him wearing that same flight suit. I believe he had, I want to say 18 distinguished flying, not the cross.
Medals.
Yes.
Yeah.
He had, so that tells you how many flights that he did. And yeah, it's pretty wild. He also flew at one time for Air America while they were in Vietnam. So it's funny, he actually had this long mustache, white t-shirt, and looked like a dark pair of jeans. And of course, he's got a pistol belt with like an old 6-shooter on it. So it was pretty funny. But I kidded him about him having long hair and that long mustache. But yeah, that was pretty funny. But he was the door gunner there for, like I said, the 3 tours.
Wow.
So one of the stories he told me was that they were flying on a rescue mission for a downed pilot. And they always flew in pairs. And his helicopter spotted the pilot that's running across a rice paddy. So the pilot started to descend down to pick the pilot up. And the commander is over in one of the little birds and told him to abort. And the captain said on the aircraft, no, we're going to get him. And the colonel's like, no, you will abort. And Lowell said, I'm at the door. I can see him. I can see his face. And we had to abort and leave him. He said, if that guy ever did make it out, he hates the Marine Corps. And I'm
Why
like,
did they have to abort? Do you know?
never said, never said. He threatened to court-martial the pilot if he didn't abort. To this day, I still have no idea. And it really bothered him because, you know,
Right.
he had to leave him there, even though he was just a door gunner. He had to leave the guy behind. So, once again, like I said, it's just more stories that, you know, kind of is our history.
Right.
So, then we go to, so this is a artillery garrison cap. So if you look at it, it's just a plain Army garrison cap, nothing much to say about it. But this one is kind of special. This garrison cap belonged to John Schaffner. John Schaffner was part of the 106th Golden Line Division. New division moving in, so they decided, in the wisdom of the Army, that they would put them in December in a quiet sector in 1944. They were there.
Quiet sector in 1944.
Right. So you pretty much see where I'm going with this.
In December, right?
In December.
Okay, yeah,
So
I
it's
think I
the
know.
first part of December, 1944. And they're divided into 3 regiments. John's in the center regiment with the field artillery. Well, around the 12th of December, the Battle of the Bulge kicks off. And the Germans hit the 106th, and they crush each regiment on either side of John Schaffner's division. So they start to pull back. So the regiment he's in, they grab their guns and they start pulling them back. Well, they stopped at a rally point, and the captain pulled John and another guy out to be the listening point post out front. So the captain said, when you hear me fire the 45, start running. So they're out there, they're waiting, they can hear the Germans, the 45 goes off, and they start running. John said that they must have thought I was some cartoon character if the Germans were watching me, because I'm running, my helmet's bopping up and down, I got my chin strap on, so every time I hit down, it hits down, every time it hits up, it goes up, and it's bouncing, and finally it goes flying off. He said, I didn't even try to go back and get it, and I ran back to the assembly area. So they lost a couple of guns at that point. So they pulled back to a crossroads, and there was a Major Bryce there. So Major Bryce, they call it Bryce's Crossroads. So they set up the gun at the crossroads, and it wasn't too long after that the Germans started shelling the crossroads. And between mortars and artillery coming in, they pretty much decimated them. So it was every man for himself. So they started running. So John and this other guy ran out of the back of a dairy and into the field with the dairy cows. Well, as they're running across, a mortar shell lands next to him, and his buddy is hit. So John turns around and starts trying to drag him out, and he looks into the wood line, and there's another GI standing there, so he waves him over. And that guy was from the 82nd. So him and the 82nd guy drag him over to a collection point. They put the guy on a stretcher on a Jeep and send him back to the rear. So John spends a few days with the 82nd, falling back, around with the Germans, and they finally pull him back, and they're going to try to reconstitute part of the 106. So they're in an assembly area beside a road, and the trucks are going through. And he notices that one of the trucks is from that division, the Golden Lines. So he waves it down and says, hey, what's in the truck? He says, it's full of duffel bags. He goes, let me see if mine's in there. He said, you ain't going to find your duffel bag in there. So John says, let me look. So he starts looking, and sure enough, he finds his duffel bag and pulls his duffel bag out. I actually have his duffel bag.
Oh, wow.
So they reconstitute him. They move him back into France, and there's several installations in France that are still held by the Germans. So the 106 reconstituted, they actually used some of their artillery against some of those installations, and then the war is over. So I've got John's garrison cap, I've got his Ike jacket, pants, boots,
And duffel bag.
and duffel bag. So I've got all those things. The reason I got this one, it was actually in New Jersey. And if you want to look online, you can look up John Schaffner, and he's actually had a video made of him about his experiences in Germany. But when he passed, they tried to give all of his stuff to the Artillery Museum, and they wouldn't take it. So a friend of mine was up there and says, I know a guy who will take it. So he called me up. I said, of course I'll take it. So I took it, and now I have it in the museum. And once again, it's items and stories.
It's funny that you mentioned Battle of the Bulge. I've got a great uncle who's still alive. He's 103. And
Wow.
he was in the 4th ID, and they got there like right after the Battle of the Bulge. Mm-hmm. And he wrote down for us his kind of day by day, or at least the major towns and the battles.
Right.
We've got that still that he wrote several years ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing that, I mean, think about it. The average World War II veteran, I mean, he's 103. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, we're just running out of them.
Oh,
There's fewer and fewer of them every
Like
day.
I told you earlier, I thought we had lost the last one last year, maybe almost 2 years ago, and I found one in the nursing home that he said that he went in 1941. Yeah. So I've still got to go back and talk to him and see if I can try to get his story and capture it before it's gone. But there's, like I said, there's so many stories out there, and it's amazing because you're talking about World War II veterans. I interviewed one, Sergeant Williams, and the first time I went to him, I just kind of generally talked to him about it, and he said, well, what are you looking? I'm like, I'm looking for what you did when you got into Germany. And he said, okay. He actually wrote down as much as he could remember about his tours from going into North Africa, into Italy, and then on all the way up into Germany. And he was a lineman and had to string the lines for all the communications. And he was shot at by a Messerschmitt 109. He was shot at by a sniper that almost got his boot. So it was pretty wild. So what he did was he was laying a line in a tree. So he climbed up in the tree and he's stringing the wire, and the one guy's pulling it, and the limb breaks. He falls down, knocked out. They sent him to one of the field hospitals, and he spent the rest of the time at the field hospital, and the war was over. But he wrote down everything, and he was close to 90 then. I mean, that's just amazing.
Wow.
I couldn't even do that now and tell you what. So, there's no way. So it's pretty funny. The other couple of things, the two books that are on the table, and let's just take this one for example. So these are two diaries of a gentleman, Gerhardt, who was in the Hitler Youth in 1936 and 1937 up until he was drafted into the Wehrmacht or volunteered about 1938. And he has written down in the diary everything that they did as Hitler Youth. And all of the pages have documents from his time there, for example, cuttings from the local newspaper. And this is, if you look in the top left, is a picture of him as a Hitler Youth. And then the big picture is him joining the Wehrmacht as a private. Now, Gerhardt wrote two diaries, and I'm working on getting those translated. And he was actually killed October 18th, 1941, which is kind of significant because that's Operation Barbarossa into Russia. So once again, it's things like that that kind of pull it together and makes you realize that veterans are veterans regardless of what country they're in. They're all veterans. And I think that's that's kind of important to remember. One of the other stories, which I think is interesting but sad as well, that I think we need to make sure that it's told, and the gentleman said that that's what he wanted. He wanted his story told. So he came up to the shop, and he was a sergeant, and he was sent to Vietnam as a supply sergeant to supply the bases that we still had in Vietnam. And he was in a group of 2 Hueys, and they got shot down. And they got shot down by the NVA. And when the helicopter hit, it rolled to the right. Well, it killed the right door gunner, and it killed the co-pilot. The pilot's severely injured, and you have the left door gunner and then him. Well, the NVA was on them before they could get out of the helicopter, so they pulled them all out. They saw that the co-pilot was too badly injured, so they killed him on the spot. So now it's the door gunner and this gentleman. So the NVA take them and they start moving them to different prisoner of war camps in Vietnam.
Now what year is this?
This is 1974.
After the Paris Treaty of 1973. And when we no longer, at least officially, had combat troops. We weren't officially
correct
involved with combat at that
right.
point.
This was all just supplying the bases while we're,
training
withdrawing and doing that.
Right.
So this is 74. So this goes on until early 75. They're moving around, and about early part of 74, they're going from another camp, and the door gunner is in front and he's behind, and one of the NVA guys says something to him and points to the door gunner. So the door gunner goes where he points, and when he does, he trips a booby trap, one of the big logs with all the stakes in it, and he's actually pinned to a tree and he's killed. So now it's only this gentleman left, or there's 2 left. So they end up later on, about February, somewhere along in there in 75, and he tries to escape several times. So the NVA decide that he's not going to escape anymore. So they take 2 iron rods with eye loops in them, and they drive them through his forearms. And then they tie ropes down to 2 logs, and he has to carry those everywhere he goes because they actually said, you're not going to escape again. So he has to carry these wherever he goes. So it's been several weeks, and they bring his friend out, and I won't go into details, but they kill his friend in front of him and say he's next. So once again, it's now 75, nearing the departure of the Americans. So he decides that he's going to leave. He's going to escape before he does. So he pulls one of the stakes out, and he actually breaks the cable off the other one. And when the NVA comes over to check on him, the guard, he kills him with one of the logs he has to carry around. Well, now he starts running. So the NVA is behind him, and he breaks out into a rice paddy, and he's just running across the rice paddy. The NVA are just right behind him, and all he hears is hit the dirt. Well, he goes face first down in the rice paddy. They open up and kill the NVA. One guy comes over and puts his knee on his back, pulls him up and says, hey, I think this guy's an American. So they pull him out. Sure enough, they identify as American. Take him back to Saigon, get him cleaned up, get him stitched up, and he's on a stretcher, and he's loading the airplane. And one of the Marines that is helping load him says, look over there, that's the UN building, it's fallen to the NVA. So this is when Saigon is falling.
Wow.
So he gets put on a plane and sent back to the States. Now, he told me the story, and he said, yes, I want to go ahead and start telling this story. Well, it wasn't much, probably about a week or 2 later, I called him up, and he says, I just can't do it anymore. And I said, okay, that's fine. What's up? He says, I'm having nightmares. I'm waking up screaming. I'm having sweats. He said, I just can't go back to that and relive that again. And I said, that's fine. I have your story and I will tell it. And he said, tell it, but I can't do it.
Right.
And once again, I think that's one of those important things that, we have to tell those stories because, like I said, if we don't, then they're gone. And then they're lost forever. So that's what I do. I identify vets and try to get them to come talk to me. A lot of them will say that I don't have anything, important to tell you. I didn't do anything. So there was one of those, and his name was Archie. And I said, Mr. Archie, just come talk to me. He says, all right. So I said, Mr. Archie, what'd you do? And he said, well, I was just an engineer. I said, engineer? Okay, that's pretty cool. So was I. So what'd you do? He goes, well, I was working up in Greenland and living in one of those cities under the ice. I said, cities under the ice? He said, oh, yeah. He said, we built a city under the ice that had a nuclear generator that provided all the power. And he said, I was a cat operator that had to take supplies from the base out to the forward areas where they were trying to put in silos to put nuclear missiles in to get closer to Russia.
When was this? What time
This
frame?
is in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
So I'm just like, what? And he said, yeah. He says, we would be driving these cats across and then just be a whiteout, be a storm there. And he said, now you're trying to figure out and look for the stakes and figure out where you're at so you don't get lost. And I'm like, you didn't do anything. No, I didn't do anything. I just did my job. And it's like, wow, that's just amazing. So once again, it's those stories of those guys. And we're now working on a couple of Desert Storm guys. I've got a couple of those lined up. I've got 2 more Vietnam veterans that I'm going to try to talk to. And like I said, the World War II guy I just found out today. And just keep recording those stories and then get them out there. Now, one of the things I'm trying to do is we've got a website up, and I've got some of the stories are already there. All 4 of the stories from World War II are actually there at that website. We also have a Facebook page, which is the same thing, Museum Military Culture, which I've gone through, I think it's 13 or 14 chapters of William's story, like I was telling you earlier, from Africa to Italy into Germany. So those stories are there, and we're starting to add more to them. The other thing I do on the Facebook page is I try to put a new item there about every week to every 2 weeks, and then if it has a story with it, then I tell that story. Or I'll actually ask, what is this item, and see how many people can guess it. Like I said, there's just so many different things that you come across. And some of them are kind of dubious, I guess. For example,
Some of the stories?
Yeah, some of the stories in the items as well.
Yeah.
Some of the stories you have to listen to but verify.
Trust but verify.
Yes, because you'll get them, especially secondhand.
Right.
And I had a widow come, and she writes out this whole story, and then she tells me about it, and I'm like, okay, great. Well, I like to, like you said, verify to find out if it's the truth. So I start verifying pieces and parts of it, and they just don't go together. Now, you have to remember that, you're talking people who are 80, 90 years old, right, who may miss whatever, or however it may go. So that story I put on okay, maybe it's true, but I don't know for sure. But there's others out there that are 100% right on it. So like I said, it's just finding them and then, being able to relate to them. And what I found is that a veteran will talk to a veteran easier than a veteran will talk to a non-veteran, because there are certain things that you can relate to they have done that you have done. When you say, well, I was at Fort Benning going to jump school. Oh, me too. I was there in '86. Oh, really? What company? I was in B company, And you kind of do that. Or, you get to where you're talking about Fort Lost in the Woods in the state of Missouri, which is
Been
Fort
there.
Leonard Wood, Missouri, and you're like, oh, well, when you were there? I was in there in 1943, and I'm like, okay, well, I wasn't there then, but, I was there in 83, and you can relate to that. Same thing with Bragg or any of those other ones. It just kind of gives you points that you can talk about, and then if you can get pictures, then that even enhances it more. Like I said, I've got some really crazy stuff that I would have never imagined that people have, brought and gave to me. For example, I have a guide-on that's got the cross rifles, and it says 55th Platoon. Ever heard of one like that?
No.
I don't think many people have. The 55th Platoon was in the 82nd Airborne Division Artillery.
Ah.
They were the Davy Crockett platoons.
Oh, okay. Early 60s.
Yep.
Late 50s, early 60s.
So if you don't know what a Davy Crockett is, a Davy Crockett is a small tactical nuke that's on the back of a Jeep. So I think there was 3 or 4 that were in each platoon that were assigned to division artillery. And this gentleman was the commander as a captain of the Davy Crockett platoon and was actually there when they deactivated it. So I have the guide-on, a picture of him and the platoon with the guide-on, and the deactivation orders for the 55th platoon.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's stuff like that that just is amazing. A lot of times you have to research to find out at least who had these items, if you can, whether it's attaching a name to it or it's a service number or anything like that. And then you can try to piece some of the stories together. And I've done that for a couple of gentlemen with their fathers. One was part of the 6th Cav that went into Normandy all the way through to Birch's Gardens. I was able to find the daily reports so I could pinpoint where they were all at and actually map it out.
Where do you find something like daily reports?
You have to go and hunt and peck through the internet to find certain things. Some things I give up on and then I come back and I stumble on them. Not all of them are there, but a lot of the units from World War II, they do have records of their activities during World War II.
They'll have a roster then too, right?
They'll have a roster. They'll have daily reports. Some of the units put together books that told the history of the unit. Some didn't. For the 6th Cav, there wasn't, but I pieced it together. And what was cool about that is the gentleman's mother was still alive, and I gave it to him, and he took it to her, and she did not know all of that. So it's those things that, once again, people don't know until you start researching it. I had another guy come in and says, hey, can you help me? My dad was in Merrill's Marauders, but I don't know much about it. I said, all right. So I got the guy's name, got some of the dates, and started researching. And just happened to stumble across a set of orders for the Raiders from 1944 and scrolled down, and his father's name was there.
Merle's Marauders, weren't there 2 guys from Stewart County?
It was actually 3, I think.
3. From Stewart County and
Yes.
Merle's Marauder. Wow.
I think around the Indian Mound area.
Yeah, that's what I'd heard.
And all 3 of them were there and came back. So I found the guy's orders, was able to confirm that he was in there. And then I found out, which I don't think has ever happened in military history, a unit was awarded the Bronze Star.
Never heard of that.
Never heard of it. So every member of that unit received the Bronze Stars for their actions. And I was just amazed at that because I had never heard of a unit getting one, all the personnel in it getting, the Bronze Star. So that was pretty wild. But like I said, you never know. Never know.
What's the funniest story you've heard?
The funniest. The funniest or the truest?
Whichever one you want to tell.
Okay, so So I was told that this seaman was on one of the units with Admiral Halsey, and that he was an intelligence operative on the ship. And if he had something to report, he would wear mismatched socks, which automatically had him written up and sent him to the commander's call, which was Admiral Halsey. So he would go in there and report whatever was going on. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was told that Admiral Halsey, because he was short, sent him on a submarine to land on Japan to do some observations on the Japan coast, and then back on the submarine, back to the ship to report to Halsey. So, funny, yes, true, I don't know. But it's strange. Sometimes it's the strangest ones that are true, but that one, I'm just like, yeah, okay, but yeah, I don't know if it's true or not, but it makes for an interesting story. And there are plenty of those. So like I said, you never know what you're going to find. I picked up a photo album one time, didn't know who the guy was, no clue. And photo albums, it's almost impossible to find out who they belong to. But I was going through it page by page, and I flipped the page, and a little piece of white flipped out underneath one of the pictures. And it was a driver's license. Now, this is supposed to be 1941, 42, 43 year. The driver's license had this guy's name on it, but the guy was like 60 years old. Same time frame. And I'm like, there ain't no way. That's impossible. The guy's too old. Come to find out, it was his son's photo album, and his son had kept his father's driver's license in there. So I was able to identify the photo album from the father's driver's license back to the soldier.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's pretty cool. So, it's that little bit of history that's captured. So that's what I try to do. And like I said, it's a labor of love, because it is. It's awesome. And like I said, just giving back to the vets their stories and keeping them is what we try to do.
Well, I know the stories are the main thing, but are there particular items that you're looking for that you just haven't been able to find?
There's always things that we're not necessarily out looking for, but anything that relates to a person that's doing their duty as a veteran, I think is important. Like I said, there's all kind of stuff that just shows up that I'm always looking for, and then people want to donate and want to give their stories. For example, a Vietnam veteran passed away. I think he was just south of the Kentucky border in Tennessee, and the wife and the daughter didn't know what to do with all his stuff. Now, he's got a foot locker full of stuff from Vietnam, and he was a combat engineer in Vietnam, and I actually have his uniform, his hat, his boots. I've got all kind of stuff from him that he brought back from Vietnam, including some of the distinctive unit insignias that they call beer cans, because they're real thin and were made in country. So they're beer can DIs. So I've got that, and like I said, it's just things like that through different people saying, hey, you don't know what to do with it? I know a guy who wants it. So that's how we keep it alive. And what we're doing is we'll then take those things and put them out on display. And one of the things that I'm working on right now is a set of display cases in the visitor center in Dover to be able to place these items in there with all of their records to go along with it, so that people can see what I see and take a look at some of the things we've got. And we'll probably start off with World War I, and then we'll work our way back. But I'm looking forward to that. I think that's going to be a real addition to the visitor center.
Now, when is that gonna?
I don't know yet. The guy that's making the cabinets is still working on them. So as soon as I find out, then I'll get with the mayor, and then we'll get them placed, and then I'll start putting the exhibits in there. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that'll be great. And hey, I appreciate what you do. I appreciate you coming on, taking the time.
Sure.
Good stories, enjoyed it, always do, and definitely have you back. And your website
Anytime.
again is museumofmilitaryculture.org. They
Right.
can go on there and find out more about you and more about what
And
you
the
have.
same thing is for the Facebook page. It's Museum of Military Culture. So there's always new items on there. And like I said, we've got a lot of different stories on there. You can see back all the items, probably the last 2 to 3 years.
And you do have some neat things out there. I've been out there a couple times.
I've got a couple of neat things.
Every now and then there's something new, and it's always good to see it.
There's always something new. We just pulled in a Studebaker truck from World War II. So, yeah, and you never know what you're going to find.
Wow. Well, hey, appreciate it. Like I say,
Anytime.
we'll definitely have you back. And once again, happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. I have some event announcements and information about our guests next week in just a few minutes. But first, thanks to our veterans again. Thank God Trump was reelected in a big way. We dodged a bullet without a doubt. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss a show. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. And you can find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our guest next week will be author James Ronald Kennedy, here to discuss his new book, Reconstruction, Destroying a Republic and Creating an Empire. Tune in and find out the truth about Reconstruction. It's not what you've been told. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.